Clever guy, that Aristotle. Hello?
Yo, Gatebreaker, it's Apple Lavender. I was just I was thinking about it, and you haven't posted a video in a long time. If you don't do that, I might just poop my pants.
God dang, that boy hasn't posted in 4 months. I'm about to tell him who his boss here.
Hello?
Hot diggity, you haven't posted in 4 months. When's the next video dropping?
I don't know, I'm kind of busy lately,
Better get that out fast.
Travis? Travis?
Hey, gate stupid. I need you to post a new video so that I can watch something in between my sets of peck explosions. And if you don't got it done in 29 minutes, I'm gonna come over there and slap your cheeks.
Shoot.
I generally don't pay much attention to lyrics when I'm listening to music. Maybe it's just my roots in instrumental video game music, such as the Little League World Series Baseball 2009 soundtrack, or maybe it's a habit I developed after listening to John Tardy vomiting indiscernible phrases into a microphone for long periods of time. Either way, I find myself ignoring lyrics when I listen to most music, leading pretty much all of my attention to the purely sonic qualities of the music. But when I'm a philosophy major, and Death, my favorite band, has a song literally called The Philosopher, the video essay practically writes itself. So yes, today I am doing a philosophical analysis of the song The Philosopher by Death. For those of you who don't know, Death was a traditional death metal band led by the now deceased guitarist and vocalist Chuck Schuldiner, Rip Chuck. Their first album, Scream Bloody Gore, is considered by many to be the first death metal album in history. Yes, Possessed fans, I see you over there, I'm not getting into that debate. Now, Scream Bloody Gore had pretty stereotypical death metal lyrics, lots of gore and horror movie inspiration. I mean, they quite literally have a song called Evil Dead on there. But later albums in Death's discography started exploring themes of psychology, the human condition, and of course, philosophy, which is where our story begins. The Philosopher is the final track off of Death's fifth album, Individual Thought Patterns. It's probably the most famous Death song, mostly due to being featured on Beavis and Butthead. Now, before getting into the lyrics, let me just say that this song features possibly the heaviest riff in any Death song. I mean, Human is probably heavier overall, but The Philosopher in particular is just so ridiculously hefty. I highly recommend checking this tune out, regardless of if you're into death metal or not. But this video isn't a musical analysis. Today we'll be looking at some interpretations of this song's lyrics and meaning, as well as some hopefully interesting philosophical connections with this song. Now, when I was originally thinking of doing this analysis, I thought, well, I'll just start with a quick literature review to see if anybody's already analyzed this song, and of course several people have, but even after finding these reviews, I still want to do this analysis, because as it turns out, I disagree with most of these interpretations. Oh no, disagreement! Yes, I am disagreeing with someone on the internet. I'll be in exile within the hour. Mainly I looked at two analyses of this song, one from Two Guys Metal Reviews and one from Genius.com. When summarizing the meaning of The Philosopher, Two Guys says, quote, Schuldiner uses the character of the philosopher as a synecdoche to criticize modern philosophy. They add that, quote, it is truly impressive to see how in just 13 lines, Schuldiner manages to tear apart the prime tenets of the art of thought. Genius.com holds a similar view on the overall meaning of this song, saying, quote, he sees philosophers as not truly understanding any individual human psyche. The song clearly depicts reasons for disliking philosophy as it is in our world today. In both Two Guys and Genius.com, the meaning of the philosopher is described as a criticism and even a direct refutation of contemporary philosophy. However, the user Numinal Enigma, which by the way is a friggin' sick username, presents a different interpretation in their comment on songmeanings.com, saying, quote, "The lyrics are basically about pseudo-intellectuals who preach bull in general. They make conjectures about things that don't actually matter or pretend to real life, and are so immersed in their bull ideas that are lacking in any sort of substance. I don't believe Chuck is ignorant enough to be condemning philosophy as a whole, though, merely just the pseudo-intellectuals." Basically, Numinal Enigma is saying that Chuck is criticizing pseudo-intellectuals preaching their own false beliefs rather than philosophy, and no, those are not the same thing. As I'll argue later in this analysis, I think Numinal Enigma's comment is a much more accurate interpretation of the philosopher than those of Two Guys and Genius.com. Yet for curious metalheads looking into the meaning of this song, they will almost certainly see Two Guys and Genius.com's interpretations before seeing Numinal Enigma's comment, which is why I'm making this video. I aim to show that these popular interpretations don't necessarily fit the lyrics of the song and Chuck's creative vision. Through an analysis of this song's lyrics and Chuck's situation when writing individual thought patterns, it is clear that Chuck is not criticizing philosophy here. Rather, he is criticizing those who are overconfident in their beliefs and try to impose them on others, which paradoxically seems to encourage philosophical thinking. Now, before continuing to the lyrical analysis, there is one crucial point to address here. Numinal Enigma's comment does contain one additional note about the meaning of this song. Quote, "Chuck said in an interview, this song was indeed about Paul Masvidal. Paul Masvidal was a former guitarist in Death and is currently a member of Cynic. Numinal Enigma is not the only one stating that Masvidal inspired the philosopher, but the internet has taught me that sometimes history is able to fabricate itself from thin air, given enough circulation. So I checked on emptywords.org for any interviews with Chuck discussing Masvidal or the philosopher, and I found no interviews stating that Masvidal had any part in the writing of the philosopher. If anyone watching does happen to know the interview where Chuck discusses this, please comment and let me know, as I'd love to set the record straight if possible. But for now, I will disregard the Masvidal question. One, because I haven't found any primary supporting evidence for it, and two, even if the philosopher was inspired in part by Masvidal, I think there's still lots of meaning in this song that shouldn't be reduced to a specific person. With that out of the way, it's time to start the lyrical analysis. And for that, I need a more proper setting.
Oh, come in. Hi, nice to see you. Well, you see, I've got a little setup here for you. If you'd like to take a seat here, I got that all ready for you. And I got the fireplace running, and of course, when I get the fireplace running, I have to have a Baja to go with it. Fantastic. And you can grab a Baja for yourself if you'd like, but I only have the one. And of course, I'd offer you a pipe to smoke, but I've since switched over to Goldfish. Today, we're going to be looking at some lyrical analysis of Death the Philosopher. Now, I've read this several times, but I'm going to read it to you today, so let's start this out. All right. First few lines here.
Do you feel what I feel? See what I see? Hear what I hear?
Of course, a few lines later, he says,
Do you live my life or share the breath I breathe?
Now here, Chuck is rhetorically asking if you, the philosopher, can actually grasp what another person is experiencing. Two Guys states, quote, "It shows his negative viewpoint by casting aspersions upon some of the essential concepts of philosophy by saying that no one can be fully understood by another human being." Genius.com agrees with this sentiment, saying, quote, "Do you feel what I feel? Who are you to tell me how to live? You're not me. You will never be me. How could you know?" Now, I agree that Chuck is criticizing those who claim to know how another person feels here, but I disagree that this is a criticism of philosophy. Many philosophers do not claim to understand other human beings. In fact, these types of claims are probably less frequent in philosophers than in those who do not think about philosophy. For example, take René Descartes. In Descartes' Meditations, the meditator, which is basically just Descartes, tries to find truths that are entirely certain, leading to the famous cogito, I think therefore I am, and res cogitans, I am a thinking thing. These statements that Descartes considers absolutely indubitable are entirely contained in one's own mind, and basically imply that you know your own mind best, which is in clear opposition with the view that one can know how another person feels. Heck, some philosophers even outright argue that no one is able to understand what another person is experiencing. A famous example is given in the philosopher Thomas Nagel's essay, What's It Like to Be a Bat? Nagel outlines a thought experiment in which one tries to imagine what it is like to be a bat. He says, quote, "It will not help to try to imagine that one has webbing on one's arms, which enables one to fly around at dusk and dawn catching insects in one's mouth, that one has very poor vision and perceives the surrounding world by a system of reflected high-frequency sound signals, and that one spends the day hanging upside down by one's feet in an attic. Insofar as I can imagine this, which is not very far, it tells me only what it would be like for me to behave as a bat behaves. But that is not the question. I want to know what it is like for a bat to be a bat. Yet if I try to imagine this, I am restricted to the resources of my own mind, and those resources are inadequate to the task." Here, Nagel is clearly of the view that understanding what it's like to be someone else is impossible, demonstrating a clear example of a philosopher arguing that each individual's experience is highly subjective. As such, I don't think Chuck is criticizing philosophers claiming to know how someone else feels. I think he is referring to people who impose their own experiences and beliefs on others, which, as seen with Descartes and Nagel, is clearly not characteristic of most philosophers.
Oh, that's just lovely. All right. Well, we did skip a few lines there, so let's go back and re-examine those.
Alright, let's stop there. Two Guys interprets these lines similarly to the lines we examined previously. However, Genius.com actually presents a different view. Ooh, complexity. Quote, "The second interpretation lists some philosophical problems and points out that people spend too long questioning reality to actually live within it." The key difference here is that Genius.com states that philosophers question reality too much to actually live their lives. Here's where I disagree, because many philosophers recognize a distinction between a philosophical attitude and a natural attitude. They question philosophical issues according to their philosophical attitude, but in everyday life, they typically follow the natural attitude. This is a concept actually discussed by one of the biggest skeptics in the history of philosophy, David Hume. In the Treatise of Human Nature, Hume states, quote, "Where am I? What am I? What has caused me to exist? And to what condition shall I return after death? Whose favor shall I court? And whose anger must I dread? What beings surround me? Which ones can I influence? And which have any influence on me? I am bemused by all these questions, and begin to fancy myself in the most deplorable condition imaginable, surrounded by the deepest darkness, and utterly deprived of the use of every skill of body and mind. Most fortunately, it happens that since reason can't scatter these clouds, nature herself suffices for that purpose, and cures me of this philosophical gloom and frenzy, either by reducing the intensity of these thoughts, or by some pastime that makes lively impressions on my senses that obliterate all these chimeras. I dine, I play a game of backgammon, I converse cheerfully with my friends, and when after 3 or 4 hours' amusement I turn back to these speculations, they appear so cold, strained, and ridiculous that I can't find it in my heart to enter into them any further." Hume explains here that people do have a natural ability to escape these philosophical questions when they become too much for them, and play backgammon instead, I guess. As such, most philosophers don't struggle to live within reality. They are still human at the end of the day. So I don't think Chuck is criticizing philosophers' inability to live their daily lives.
All right, first verse is over. Now let's head on to the chorus. I love this part.
Now, that first sentence, lies feed your judgment of others, is demonstrating that people's hasty beliefs are used to inform what they think of others. And that second line, behold how the blind lead each other, is a pretty common phrase for when those who lead are as ignorant as their followers. Though Genius.com actually points out that this is a reference to the Gospel of Matthew, which I actually was not aware of. However, here's where my disagreement regarding this line lies. Two Guys says, quote, behold how the blind lead each other seems to be a direct reference to the idea in the third verse that philosophers are really no greater than the rest of us, and in fact, quite a bit worse. Okay, so as it turns out, most philosophers don't think they're any better than anyone else, because a major part of being a philosopher is being intellectually humble. This idea goes all the way back to Plato and Socrates. In Plato's Apology, Socrates compares his own wisdom to that of others, saying, quote, I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile, but he thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I am likely to be wiser than he to this small extent, that I do not think I know what I do not know. What Socrates is saying here is that he essentially knows nothing, yet he differs in that he does not think he knows what he doesn't know. This is a clear example of how many philosophers are intellectually humble, not claiming to know things that they don't. Of course, there have been some pretty arrogant philosophers in history. I mean, Descartes existed, at least he thought he did. But philosophers typically don't go around claiming they're superior to others, as challenging one's own beliefs and thinking critically promotes a strong sense of intellectual humility. Then comes that paradoxical statement of the philosopher, you know so much about nothing at all. A pretty clever juxtaposition here between a lover of wisdom and one who knows nothing. According to Genius.com, this line means, quote, everything that the philosopher knows, although large in quantity, is truly useless and has no purpose. Again, most philosophers don't claim to have this large body of knowledge that others don't. So then the question is, why does Chuck call the subject the philosopher if he's not criticizing philosophers? Well, I think that Chuck calling the philosopher a philosopher is meant to demonstrate how epistemically arrogant people think of themselves as wise when they aren't. Again, go back to Plato's Apology. The people Socrates speaks with claim to have this knowledge that they truly don't have. These are the people that I think Chuck is criticizing, those who pronounce to the world that they are philosophers only to spout beliefs based on nothing at all.
All right. Oh, jeez, that's enough of the chorus. Oh, let's move on to the bridge before I start to scream bloody snore in here.
Here, Two Guys says, quote, the phrase ideas that fall seems to be making reference to some of the core ideals of philosophy, which, as we have already seen, Schuldner views as false. Alright, here's a point where I disagree. Philosophy doesn't really have core ideals. Regarding any philosophical view, you will pretty much always find some philosopher who disagrees. Heck, even the question of what philosophy is has tons of conflicting viewpoints. So here, I don't think Chuck is attacking the core ideals of philosophy. Rather, I think the ideas that fall under shadows of theories are just the beliefs of people who construct these tall, grand theories for themselves and make all of their ideas fall within their theories. Two Guys then adds that, quote, according to him, these very ideas are thoughts that grow narrow upon being verbally released. One reading of the text would suggest that Schuldner is saying their core doctrines cannot even be put into words because it prevents them from seeing the true nature of reality, and thus creating flawed ideologies. Two Guys says that their core doctrines can't be verbalized because they prevent seeing actual reality and create mistaken ideologies. But I think they mean should here. Like, core doctrines shouldn't be verbalized because they skew reality and lead to false beliefs. That seems more like an ethical judgment, which I don't think Chuck is making here. Instead, I actually think Genius.com does a good job of interpreting this part, saying, quote, this is obviously a reference to the fact that, of course, philosophical reasoning can make sense, it's just that the irrationality of thoughts can never be fully translated into our material, rational world. What we say is always a draft of what we are actually thinking. Therefore, it's a mistake to sell what we say for law because it's an incomplete draft of a much greater thought, untranslatable in words. This is actually a fair point, and I think this is actually what Chuck probably meant here. Although it actually seems kind of counterintuitive to Genius.com's view that Chuck is criticizing philosophy, as the question of what language is capable of conveying is actually a very prevalent area of philosophical investigation. So Chuck actually seems to promote a philosophical mindset here.
Ah, yes, the second verse. So heavy, so delightful. Let's have a second sip of Baja here. All right, let's see here. Let's have a look now.
Alright, so for this line, Two Guys says, quote, "The character of the philosopher, who is the you in this song, is so entrenched in his own paradigms that he no longer has full control of his mind." I think this is a good interpretation, but again, this sort of thinking is exactly what philosophy intends to avoid. A big aspect of most philosophy is examining one's own beliefs and finding what might need to be changed or affirmed. As such, I think Chuck is really promoting philosophical thought here.
Oh boy, that was quick. The next line. All right.
Alright, here is where Two Guys and I really disagree. Two Guys says that this line means, quote, "Philosophers do not care about what is logical or correct, but only what is complex and interesting." This suggests that the philosophers are directly violating one of their own core concepts, Occam's razor, making them hypocrites on top of everything else. Alright, let's unpack this. First, philosophers don't care about what's logical? Logic is an entire philosophical field. The earliest works on logic, such as those by Aristotle, were written by philosophers. There's a big reason that logic is a required class for most philosophy majors. And yes, of course they care about what is complex and interesting, because why would you investigate something uninteresting? But they aim for correctness and logical validity within those complex and interesting topics. Second, Occam's razor is not a core concept. Again, philosophy doesn't really have core ideals, and Occam's razor is certainly no exception. Third, caring about complex and interesting questions doesn't even violate Occam's razor. Occam's razor basically says, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, that, quote, "entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity," essentially saying that you shouldn't make things more complex than necessary. The key here is beyond necessity. If an issue is complex, you will need to examine those complexities. It's not beyond necessity, and there won't be simple answers. So it is not beyond necessity for a complex issue to have some amount of complexity when you're investigating it. Now, Genius.com makes a slightly different point here, saying, quote, "We only make decisions based on what appears to us as deep in logic and reasoning, even though we are all biased and wrong." Well, yes, of course we do. We make decisions based on what seems correct, even though we're probably wrong. I really don't think Chuck would be criticizing that here. I think what he's saying is that some people opt to believe something profound solely because it is profound, for things like admiration from others or wanting to seem thoughtful. These behaviors are not characteristic of philosophers, as most philosophers value how well beliefs hold up to scrutiny, rather than how cool they sound.
All right, finally, almost done. I can finally go get a better beverage. Yeah, you heard me right. Baja ain't got nothing on Spark. Last line.
So you preach about how I'm supposed to be, yet you don't know your own sexuality.
Two Guys interprets this line as, quote, "Schuldner says of the philosopher, 'You preach about how I'm supposed to be, yet you don't know your own sexuality,'" which essentially is his way of saying that if one cannot understand basic truths about themselves, they should not be telling others how to live. I actually agree with their interpretation here. But again, most philosophers would agree with this sentiment. Take Socrates, for example. Bro basically went around destroying the truths people thought they knew, despite them preaching about these truths to other people. I really don't think Chuck is criticizing philosophers here. He is criticizing those who impose their hastily crafted and unsupported beliefs on others, posing as intellectuals. And that completes the lyrical analysis. Hopefully you're seeing how, in this song, Chuck is not criticizing philosophy, and in fact, through many of these lyrics, he is encouraging a philosophical mindset. Instead, he is criticizing people who think highly of their own beliefs and push them onto others. But the evidence for this interpretation doesn't actually stop with the lyrical analysis. There are several reasons, based on Chuck's mindset while writing individual thought patterns, that support the view that this song is targeting pseudo-intellectualism.
305, 320, 500.
So I wanted to record part of this video outside because I wanted to change the locations. But when I went to go get my bike, it was my dad's genius idea to mount the bikes on the wall where you can never reach them. So I ended up coming here on a pink Razor scooter, which I don't think has helped my reputation in this neighborhood very much. All right, so now we're going to talk about a little bit of Chuck's situation while writing individual thought patterns. So while looking through many of the interviews with Chuck, housed on emptywords.org, we can see that Chuck had a very pessimistic outlook of certain people when writing individual thought patterns. In an interview with Metal Shock from 1993, right after individual thought patterns release, Chuck is asked if there is a common concept hidden in his albums. He responds that, quote, "There's a deep concept, a subject that concerns me very much and concerns the whole music business and the situations happening around a band. I'm referring to these envious people that smile in front of you, yet behind your back would like to see you dead." With this quote, Chuck shows us that he is thinking about malicious, deceitful, harmful people as a deep subject underlying much of his music around this time. As such, it seems much more reasonable that he is criticizing specific people rather than the subject of philosophy in The Philosopher. This idea is supported even further in a 1993 interview with Terrorizer, where Chuck, reflecting on the meaning behind individual thought patterns, says, quote, "Half of the record will have a concept about people that I have to deal with, that affect a lot of people, stuff that I'm sick of seeing, people's misconceptions, people's inability to think for themselves, people out there that, in my opinion, are pure evil that are within this business." Notice again that Chuck is targeting specific people, but even further, he mentions people's inability to think for themselves. This is an even more clear example of Chuck's pessimistic outlook toward people who do not examine their beliefs and think critically, which has clear ties with the themes we found in the lyrical analysis supporting the idea that the philosopher is targeted toward those who are intellectually irresponsible. All right, time to scoot back to my house.
Time's ticking, boy. Time's ticking.
When I was first looking into what the internet had to say behind the meaning of this song, there was a comment I saw on Two Guys that interested me from an anonymous user who said, quote, "One can only criticize/refute/despise philosophy by philosophying." Now, at first it just caught my eye because it was kind of funny, but that got me thinking. If Chuck really is critiquing philosophers, like Two Guys and Genius.com say, then isn't the fact that he's using philosophy to critique philosophy contradictory? But this is exactly why I think Two Guys and Genius.com's interpretations are inadequate. Chuck knew that a philosophical mindset means thinking critically, examining one's own beliefs, and maintaining epistemic responsibility, which is why I don't think Chuck was critiquing philosophy at all. He was warning us about the people who masquerade as the wise, pronouncing their answers to the masses despite knowing so much about nothing at all. So what message can we take away here? Well, based on the interpretation in this video, I would say the biggest lesson is think for yourself. Be critical, examine and remain humble in your beliefs, and avoid hoisting your beliefs onto others. And of course, that's much easier to say than to actually do, but one really straightforward way to do that is to challenge yourself. Find a video or an article or something that you disagree with, and really think through questions like, why do they think this way? Why do I think differently? What are the strengths and weaknesses of each of our perspectives? And that goes for this video too. If you disagree on any of my points that I made, or if you found some information that disagrees with my account, feel free to let me know in the comments. I would much appreciate any input that you have. With that, I'd just like to close with a final Rip Chuck. Investigating The Philosopher has really shown me how well thought out and layered his lyrics can be, and it has given me a much deeper appreciation for the work that he put into his art. I hope you found this video interesting or entertaining, and thank you for watching. How are we looking like for time? Uh-oh.
Time's up!
Oh, shoot. Okay. Alright, I guess get it in the editing bay. Fill more up. Here, you get quotes. Sources not plagiarizing.
No.
Almost there.
Where's my video, boy?
No, Travis, it's almost done. Look.